Now let's look at some basic processing for audio files. So I'm going to scroll to our John Hurley example and into raw tracks. Let's select all of these and pull them into the organizer window. So now we have 4 pieces of voice recording, tracks 3, 14, 17 and 22 from a recording session we've done recently, and a piece of music on MP3, which is all fine. Let's first check if they're all at the same sample rate as we did in previous videos. So let's double click on the file and let's look down to the bottom right of the screen and make sure that it says 32,000 16-bit mono. It does that for voice. Let's double click again for 14, 17, 22 and the music. And we're on the ball. Brilliant. All sample rates the same, so now we can start working. Now the first thing I notice about the music track is that it's been recorded obviously on a mono microphone, which is fine. It'll sound fine, I'm sure, but we might add a little bit to it later on by changing the mono to a stereo file and adding a little bit of reverb and a little bit of EQ to make it sparkle a little bit more. First though, let's look at the voice recordings. So 3, 14, 17 and 22. Let's start with 3. This gentleman is an artist from Tralee in County Kerry called John Hurley, and he's talking about the craft of what he does when he paints.
Back in the studio I tried to recreate this.
As we can see here, there are lots of pauses in his delivery. He's got a really good voice. He sounds very contemplative, which is perfect for the piece we're trying to put together. But we need to edit it out a little bit. So selecting a little bit at the start here and hitting the delete button will sharpen up this a little bit at the start. We might want to take out a little bit here. We certainly might want to take out a little bit near the end. But overall the audio is very quiet and we need to get it a little bit louder. Here's where we're going to show you how to normalize the audio. Now normalizing in Audition doesn't normalize the sound in the way that you would think. It just turns up the volume level to a safe degree. Normally 100%. You'll find the normalize function inside an amplitude or in the shortcut bar. It's got 2 pink lines, a little squiggly green audio file in the middle of it. Looks like a lettuce sandwich to me, but maybe that's just me. When you normalize something in Audition to 100%, it uses peak normalization. What that means is it chooses the highest peak in the audio file and doesn't push that highest peak above full scale. The rest of the audio will follow. As a result, normalizing is great for files that don't have a very peaky recording, but if the recording is very peaky, it's not really going to do much. In this case, though, it has raised John's voice quite a lot. And let's listen again now.
Back in the studio I tried to recreate this. The mark making, the scratching of the palette knife against the board, the application of paint by brush.
So now that's made a really nice job. It's made it a nice bit louder at least, and it's brought it up as loud as it can, dictated by, of course, the peaks, which I think the biggest one is here, isn't it? Which seems to be hitting 0 dB or full scale. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll remove some of the unnecessary noise and frequencies at the top and bottom of this audio file. We're not getting too technical here, don't worry. We're going to apply a little bit of graphic equalization to this. Into Effects, down to Filters, and into Graphic Equalizer. In this version of Audition, the graphic EQ comes in 3 different flavors. There is a 10 band or 1 octave, 20 bands, half octave, and 30 bands, 1/3 octave. It gives you huge control over the audio that you are listening to by controlling individual frequency values along the sonic spectrum. That sounds a little bit sciencey, but basically it allows you to control different elements of what we hear. From the very low frequency sounds, which we would describe as bass, to the mid frequency sounds, which would contain a lot of the vocal energy in voice and some musical instruments, and the higher frequencies. First thing we'll do here is we'll reset all of the values to 0. And I want to create a little thing called a shelf filter, which allows us to remove a lot of the noise that we don't want at the bottom of an audio file, which are low frequency thuds and hums and rumbles, and also a little bit of the harshness which exists at the top of some audio recordings. So what we do here is we'll grab the -31, we will grab the 40, we will grab the 50, the 63. Generally for male voices you take down everything below 80. For female voices you could take down anything under 125, but again it depends on the voice. At the other end, everything above 16 should certainly be reduced for voice. Now let's just click OK and watch what happens. This was recorded in his living room, so there are going to be sounds at both ends of the spectrum, low and high, that we won't really want to hear. If we're using music with this later on, though, this isn't hugely important. But for voiceover that's being used dry, without any music or effects, it's good to clean up the file. If we want to access the graphic equalizer function again, we don't have to go back into the effects menu and down to filters and over to graphic EQ. We could just simply select the button F2 at the top left of your keyboard. F2 repeats the last command. Now, there's often a nice edge in a male voice around 8 kilohertz. So what we'll do here with John's voice is we'll grab the 8 kilohertz value and push it up by 3 dB. I want to do it precisely here by popping in the number 3 in the gain dB window. Now let's listen there by previewing what that sounds like.
Back in the studio I tried to recreate this. The mark making, the scratching of the palette knife against the board, the application of paint by brush.
Now I can certainly hear that. I don't know if you can. There's a nice edge to his voice now. I think we'll apply that across the entire file. You should notice a little jump as that little bit of equalization is applied. We do the same now with the others. And again, you might want to get into topping and tailing some of the audio, editing up just different sequences, like this piece here where he seems to be thinking a bit and breathing. We might just shorten that. And again, normalize to 100% is perfect. And graphic EQ, I'll use the little keyboard shortcut here. It looks like a little humpback camel. And we'll click OK. And now 8 kilohertz lift just there, adding a nice edge to John's voice. Finally, you might just want to squeeze the volume up a little bit more. And we'll do this via hard limiting. And hard limiting applies a limiter, or a topmost limit to the audio volume, while also pushing up a lot of the audio underneath by a predefined number of decibels. You sort of need to know what you're doing here, because you don't want to overcook the audio and make it sound too harsh. In some cases, if you over-apply hard limiting, the breaths will sound really loud, and the recording in general will sound very unnatural. So you want to preserve the natural sound of this recording whilst maximizing the volume. So again, into Effects, Amplitude, and Hard Limiting. The toolbar shortcut is to the left of the Normalize one, and we click that. Now in here you'll see the hard limiting dialog's got lots of different values you can input. At this basic level, all we'll deal with are the first two. Limit max amplitude to and boost input by. Limiting the max amplitude allows you to choose how loud you want this audio file to be. We've mentioned previously that 0 dB is full scale, and going above this gets into the whole area of distortion. So we'll keep this just below 0 dB at minus 0.5 dB. You can set this to -1 if you want, or -2, or -3. It's entirely up to you, depending on what you're doing, of course. We can then look at the second box, and that's the boosting the input by a certain number of dB. The dB scale is on the right-hand side of the window, so we want the volume to be boosted up in general to be as loud as possible without overcooking some of the peaks. I'm looking at the audio file here, and I'm looking at 14 and thinking, well, if I draw a line across from -3, there's not a lot there. I could possibly boost this by 6. That's the default value, and maybe even by 8. You'll judge. You can lose some of these little peaks without affecting the audio quality too much, but if you overdo it and push it too much, the audio quality will suffer. Let's apply a 6 dB hard limit there at -0.1 and watch what happens. Oh, okay, good. That's nice and loud without being overcooked, I would imagine. Let's go back to track number 3 and try the very same thing. Again here I'm looking at 6 and I'm thinking, yeah, I think this could be a 6 dB hard limit. F2 to repeat last command, and OK. And again, that looks really, really good. What you've got to bear in mind in Edit View is you're really doing the preparation for assembling your files in multi-track view. All of the files should be at the same sample rate, and more or less they should be at the same volumes. If you're absolutely happy with those, Control S or Save all your changes, and we're ready to move on next to multi-track view.